Welcome back to the Blazor Server In-Depth course. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at adding authentication later to our Blazor app. So in this instance, we're thinking about having a Blazor app already running, and then we say, man, I'd love to have some type of authentication in this app. What do I do? Okay, so that's the premise behind this video. So let's create a new project, a Blazor app. We'll call this Blazor app, and we'll call this the auth later demo. And we'll hit create. Make sure it's Blazor app.NET Core 3.1, enable HTTPS, but do not add authentication. We did that last time, but this time we're going to simulate having not done this. What do we do now? Okay, so let's get this project running. And once we're up and running, we'll just make sure it runs just because we want to verify that we have a working product before we start breaking it. Okay, so let's make sure it's running. And it's in the wrong browser, but it's working just fine. Okay, so now let's start adding in authentication. Now the bad news here is that we don't have as easy an experience as we do with Razor pages. Okay, so if you're using an ASP.NET Core MVC or ASP.NET Core Razor pages or ASP.NET Core API, this is an easy experience. What you would do is right-click on Blazor app and you would say Add, New Scaffolded Item, Identity, and then walk through this process. Unfortunately, this doesn't work with Blazor. It may in the future, and so if you see a version other than 1.0.0.0, check it out and maybe it will work. But for right now, it doesn't work. And so we have to add this manually. But it's not horrible, okay? There's a few steps you can do that just make life a little easier, and it really comes down to just a few steps to take care of. Let's do this. We're going to create this Blazor app is our real application. So let's change the index page to say our existing app and then we'll put a paragraph tag here. This app did not have authorization, but we are going to add it in. Okay? Just be clear which app is which, because I'm going to right click on my solution and I'm going to say Add New Project. Choose Blazor app, choose EF sample maybe as a project name, hit create. Choose the same settings, but change this to include an individual user account, store user accounts in app. Hit OK. So that's the authentication we're used to. Now hit create. So what we're doing here is we're creating a sample project that has authentication already built in. And the reason why is because it's just going to save us a few steps. And it's going to give us some signposts as to what steps to take and what things to configure. Okay? So if we look down here under dependencies and manage NuGet packages, you'll see there's 5 NuGet packages and they're all version 3.1.1 as of right now. I've got the show preview versions checked. We can uncheck that. But let's go to dependencies in our real project, say manage NuGet packages, and let's start installing those same packages. Okay? So we're going to start off with Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Identity. And there's a few of them here that we want, oops, not installed. We want the ones that are already on the server. So you want identity.ui. We want to install that. Let's not do pre-release. So identity.ui, which is 3.1.3 is the latest stable version as of right now. Install that. I accept. And then you want the entity framework core. So Microsoft.asp.core, entity framework core. And accept that. And then we also want the tools and SQL Server. So let's see if you find this in the list. I may miss it. You can yell at me. I don't see it. So instead of trying to search for it that way, we're just going to put at the end of this .SQL Server. Here's the reason why. It's a little bit different. Entity framework. So we're looking for, and then we're looking for entity framework core .SQL Server. There we go. So Microsoft.entity framework core .SQL Server and Microsoft.entity framework core .tools. Accept on both of those. So now we've added our 4 packages, and if we look, that's all we really need. All right, is those 4. There's one more that is added. If we went back here and looked at the NuGet packages, there's one more that's added, which is Microsoft.ASP.core.diagnostics.entity framework core. This is for entity framework core error pages. Okay, so it won't hurt to add this. We might want to include that, but it is kind of optional, I believe. Microsoft.ASP.core.diagnostics. .entity framework core. There we go. So we'll install that too, just to have parity with the other tooling. Okay, so now that we have those packages installed, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at our DB context. So in data, in the data folder, note that we have this application DB context. We're going to create that same class in this data folder. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste this. I'm not going to copy and paste the namespace. I create a new class, and I'll call it application DB context. And I'll overwrite this and paste it in. Notice we need some using statements here. So control dot to add the using for Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Identity.Entity Framework And then down here, control dot for the using Microsoft.Entity Framework Core. All right, so there's our application DB context. And this is what controls how the database is built. All right, we don't need this migrations folder because that's generated for us automatically when we apply migrations. So we can close out of this, and we're going to look next at what we have in startup.cs. So there's our sample version, and then here is our new version. Okay, so let's separate these into 2 document groups. And if you're wondering which is which, what you can do, there's 2 ways of finding out. One way is to look at, see which one has more stuff. Say this one has more stuff on the left. You can also hover over it and notice it says auth later demo. It says EF sample. So this is the EF. This is the default connection string from appsettings.json. All right, so we're going to grab that. We're also going to grab the default identity, which is that identity user, and it requires confirmed accounts. Okay, so what this is says, okay, we're going to use some identity information so that we can identify who a person is, the authorization or authentication, I mean. And then this up here sets up our database with Entity Framework. So we're going to copy these two lines. And we're going to come over to our version, and right above Razor Pages, we're going to paste those in. Also note, we have to do some control dots here. Add our using, and control dot again to add our using. And I think that's all the usings we need to add. It is. So now we need to come down here. Notice this add scoped. So add scoped, what it's doing is it's setting up this authentication state provider. You can set up a generic one like a server authentication state provider, which you don't have to actually even build because it's already built in. But in the case of our example, they're using their own state provider, and so we're going to use that same one. So let's go to end, go to home, copy this line, and we'll put it in the same spot. So paste that into our class. Okay, and again, it's going to yell at us because it doesn't have the using statement we need. So add the using, and then I believe this one, add reference to, nope, we don't want to do that. We don't have this yet. No worries, we'll get there. Don't add a reference to EF sample. That would not be good. Okay, we'll create that in just a minute. Let's scroll down here and see what else is in this section. Okay, right down here we have two lines under routing, which are use authentication and use authorization. So we need to make sure we add those in. So after use routing, we're going to add our authentication and authorization. And we also have to map our controllers. And that's because the identity system, even though it's in Blazor, is using the MVC system. So we're using the same identity system, even though the configuration and tweaking is a little bit different than the normal, which I can't use the scaffolding. We're still using that same MVC system, even though we're in Blazor. And what that shows is even though we're using a Blazor system, we can still mix and match the other parts of ASP.NET Core. So don't think like you're locked into just Blazor stuff. You can use Razor Pages, you can use MVC, you can even use API. Okay, so just note those are possible. All right, so now our startup looks like the other startup. We can close out of both startups. We can go back to our Solution Explorer. Now you've tweaked startup, let's go to our app.razor, which this is what their app.razor looks like with cascading authorization or authentication state. And we have the authorized route view. And I think those are all the changes there are. So we can just copy this since there is no changes in things like main layout or anything else. These are all default stuff. I mean, it's just boilerplate. We can go to our app razor and overwrite it. Done. So now let's go to the login display. So under the shared folder, we have login display, which login display allows us to add these links either with hello in your name or and log out or register or log in if you're not logged in. Well, we don't have this page in our shared folder up here. So let's add new item. And this is a Razor component and it's called login display. We can just overwrite this with the, again, boilerplate code. We can tweak it if we want to, but this is all pretty much standard Vue stuff. So now we have our login display. Now we need this whole folder here from areas. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm actually going to copy this. I come up to my Blazor app on the root of the project, right click, and I'm going to say paste. And now I have areas, identity. Let's make sure the namespaces are right because they're not. All right, so control dot change namespace. Let's do that. So we're changing the namespace. Now, when we go back over, we should be able to map this over. That's in startup. So down in startup at the bottom, actually right here, we have this revalidating identity authentication state provider. Control our login display. It's the same basic structure. It's just this is for MVC. So we do need this because it is necessary for some of the MVC pages, but just note that that needs to be there. And again, it's boilerplate, it's copy paste stuff. Okay, so now what we can do is we can delete our EF sample. All right, so let me scroll up here because right now it's going off the page and I can't even see it. So remove. Yes, it's going to be removed. Note that does not delete the source code. If you open a folder in File Explorer and you look, now we have the EF sample. I'm going to right click and say delete on that. And now it's actually gone. So even though you're moving from the project, it's not actually gone from disk. Okay, so now what we need to do is we haven't applied our migrations yet. Oh, I forgot one thing we need to do in our app settings.json. We'll have to do it manually. So we go to app settings.json. We need to add connection string information here. So the connection strings, it's plural, is a common or a standard setting or section. So make sure you spell it correctly. And in here we'll say default connection. That's the name we gave it. And then in here we need to have a connection string. Now you could go to connectionstrings.com and figure one out, but if you're using LocalDB, here's a trick. Open up your LocalDB database set. Go to databases and find one. Doesn't matter which one, just find one. EF data, fine. Sure, go to properties. And then, well, that's not going to show it for me. Awesome. Let's do this again. So it turns out that my EF database actually isn't there. So let's go down to what I know is there, which is the scaffold auth DB. If it's actually there, expand it out to see that it's there. And then on the right, you'll see this list. And one of the things on this list is connection string. So I can copy this, and then I can go to connection strings and I can paste it in. Okay, so it should, in theory, make your life easier, unless it gives you trouble, and then it doesn't. Okay, so there we have our connection string, and right now it's talking to the scaffold auth DB. But that's not what I want. I want this to be our auth later DB. So let's change the name. That's a very important part though. If you don't change the database name, you're going to cause problems with your existing database. You don't want to do that. So make sure that you change the database name. But otherwise, now this will create a new database which does not exist. So auth later, we don't have any AUTH. So that should show up soon in this list once we create it. So auth later DB, and we're all set otherwise. So we can hit save on this. All right, so I believe it's time to actually create our database. So we're going to first do the add migration, and we'll call this migration initial DB, or for initial database. Hit enter, watch it build, and then hopefully it creates our migration, which it does. This is now our migration for our database. Come up here, we can see that we have a migrations folder now inside of our root of our project. It says migration, it has all the information about the migration. And now once we've done that, we can go back to the package manager console and we can say update-database. This is where we actually build our database. So the migration sets up what's the difference between the previous version of the database and this version of the database, which the first time you apply it is going to be from nothing to an actual database. If we make changes since then it will be the changes between when we last apply a migration and now. Now an entity framework, if you're using for the identity system, if you're just using it for identity, you'll probably only have one migration, just the creation. But every time you make changes that would go to the entity framework database, you first of all add migration and then you update the database. So add migration creates these migration documents, which it will then run against the database. And then the update database will figure out where the database is at and then run any new migrations since then, which does mean the update database is safe to run over and over because it won't update the database if it's already up to date. So let's go to SQL Server Object Explorer. We're going to refresh this list. So let's hit the refresh button. Under databases, we should have an auth later DB. Inside here we have our tables, including our ASP.NET users, which is those users that are authorized to use our system, which right now is nobody. Again, we'll create that in a minute. Now also note that the EF migration history, I just want to show you this real quick. This table tells you the migration ID, notice the migration ID, that was recently run against this database. Okay? And it even tells you the version, the product version. So this way, we know what the migration was that was last run against this database. That's how we know if there are any new migrations to run, is it compares that against what's the latest migration you have. Okay? And so you'll see all the migrations appear in here as you apply them. Okay. This is a new application. So even though we created an application in the last lesson, we don't have that same account. Now, for my sanity's sake, I create the same account every time with my demos. That way I don't have to remember multiple passwords. Okay? And it says, hey, do you want to confirm your account? Yep, I want to do that. All right, now you can go back here. Let's go back here. Notice this register and login. This page is a little bit different than if we were to go here and go here. Okay, this is that partial view up here that I showed you that comes from MVC. So when I said, let's bring it up here. When I said in areas right down here, where this looks a lot like what we have in that login partial, well, that's because this is the MVC side. Well, this is the MVC page, and that's the what's displayed off of this page behind me, or behind the form. Okay, so we're going to log in. And yes, I'll remember me. Log in. Great, we're logged in. And if we click on our name, we can see our profile information. We can even update our phone number, our email address. Notice the phone number is saved. Change our password, add two-factor authentication, delete or download our personal information. And we're all set. We're logged in. And so now we have authentication set up for even an existing application. Yes, it's more of a pain than doing it right up front. But if you get in a spot where you realize, oops, we need it, we don't have it, no problem. It's mainly about copying an empty template and just bring it in. The one thing to look out for, well, there's a few things, but the big one to look out for is in this, this revalidating identity authentication state provider. Make sure you change the namespace so you don't have a bad namespace here. Okay? And yeah, you'll forget a spot or two like I did. You know, like you'll forget this login display. Just don't do what I did and keep your sample around a little longer. Make sure the application actually runs before you delete your sample. Otherwise, you're good to go. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. We've covered how to take an existing application, existing Blazor app, and add in authentication later so that we can get that experience even though we didn't bring it in with the initial template. Okay? Practice this. Try it out, because if you're going to use Blazor in production, you'll almost certainly have to do this at some point. And so it's good to know how it works, and it gets your hands on all the different pieces so that even if you never have to do this again, you know where all the different pieces are for authentication, so you know what to tweak and where to go to tweak it. Okay? So try it out, and once you're done, come on back for the next lesson where we talk about how to then use authorization.